Good morning. I hope you guys are doing well. Listen to this scratchy voice. Goodness. We'll just go till we can't go, guys. So today, just a little programming note. Goodness, I'm hoarse. Today, just a little programming note. I am expecting a package that I actually have to sign for. So if that comes during the show, we'll just pause and we'll get that taken care of. I have no idea what's going on with my voice. I'm waiting for a referral to a speech therapist. So I don't know. It's just, I don't know if the damage from the GERD is permanent or what, but it's very frustrating, especially when you do this sort of work. So just be in prayer about that if you don't mind. I want to thank you to everybody who sent in donations this week. That was just much appreciated. Thank you to my folks who donate every month. That means a lot to me. And don't feel like you can't donate because, you're not rich. I have people who just send $5 a month, and it really helps. It adds up as more and more people do that. So the way that you can donate and support the show is to, once you're out of the live chat, you can look in the description box. And in the description box are the links to PayPal, Venmo, and Cash App. So you can donate that way. Those are super easy ways to donate. You can also donate in the chat. There's a below the little chat box next to the little icon that denotes it's you is a $sign. And you can hit that $sign and you can send in a tip as it were. You just enter your card information and then it's in there. And any chat you want to donate on, you can donate. And that's very much appreciated. Rumble does let us keep all of the money from our donations. They keep most of the money from the revenue from ads. Really, you get hundredths of a penny for every bit of ad revenue they make. That's not unusual, though, so I'm not faulting Rumble for that. They have to pay for their platform. But donating in the live chat, donating via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal are ways you can support the show that we actually get to keep all of the money that's donated. Goodness, I am so sorry for this raspy voice. I almost put it off a day, put off the reading for a day, but I'm finding my voice is crap, whether it's today or tomorrow. But anyway, today we start John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, and I am super excited about it. I always pray about what book to read, and I finished the last book, and I had in my own mind a book that I wanted to read. Hold on, one of my cords is bent here. Makes Don crazy when I bend my cords. Good morning, Rossi. So I had one book in mind and was settled on it, and God just impressed upon me Of Mice and Men. I don't even know where that came from. I haven't read this book since high school, but this is the book he wants read, so this is the book I'm going to read. Also, I wanted to tell you guys, so this week, or I guess this week and last week, I've been hearing about the series Yellowstone, and I started to watch it, and it was set in current time. And I like watching things that were set in a simpler time. So the same screenwriter who wrote, or screenplay writer who wrote Yellowstone wrote two prequels. One is called 1883 and one is called 1923. And it's on Paramount Plus. And if you have a Walmart subscription, like if you get Walmart deliveries and stuff, you're set up on a subscription, Paramount Plus is free to you. So look into that. Now you can't see everything on Paramount Plus from that. So I can't remember if I upgraded to get it or not. But I would say that 1883 and 1923 are so worth your time. It is like, they were like reading an epic novel. The writing is beautiful. The writing, and I so appreciate good writing. The writing is so beautiful that I actually put the captions up just to have the experience of reading the words as they were said. It is so poetically written. The character development is exceptional. I wish this guy would write books, because if he would write books, I would buy every single one. And there's not an author I could say that about. It is just a gift to the soul to watch them. I'm telling you, I'm not overselling this. So 1883 has a solid ending. So kind of all of the issues pretty much are resolved. 1923 does not. it kind of ends up in the air. And so just know that going in, and you won't feel the heartbreak that I felt at the end because I didn't know what happened to all of the characters. And Don invented this new game where when something ends and you don't know what happened, going forward, we make up our own endings. And we actually found that to be very satisfying. So I would encourage you. Hi, Mount Clay, my friend. How are you? So I would encourage you to watch those. It's great television. There's nothing in there that would be, it's very historically telling. It's, I would say 1923, if you're going to watch that with older kids, like tweens maybe, or older, I would keep in mind that part of the story that they tell is how Native children were taken from their homes and sent to Christian schools to be trained to be wives and farmers and all of that. The little girl that is sent to the school endures quite a bit of abuse, and that's not inaccurate. It's just very difficult to watch. And so just keep that in mind if you have a child who's very sensitive, not ready for those sorts of historical lessons. And there is some sex, more so in 1923 than in 1883. So just keep that in mind. I think you can look up the episodes and see, where they fall on the appropriateness scale. You can always fast forward. But the sex is generally, or most always, between two committed people. Sadly not married, but committed. And just so you have that, for parents who are homeschooling, or the history lesson and just the difficulties of 1883, as the pioneers taking the Oregon Trail, and just to be able to appreciate how much different that time was and how difficult and dangerous their lives were, and the kind of bravery and stepping up to leadership that was needed. I love buying books like that for my grandkids because it's just, there's so much garbage children's literature these days. But I love that. I love that this overarching tale is of human survival and of teamwork and of right and wrong and punishing wrong and very harshly so at sometimes. And it seems harsh, but you have to remember it's for the survival of the group. So you can't abide a thief. Somebody steals your cattle, your whole group starves to death. And it's just beautiful. It's so beautiful. I encourage you to watch them both. And so I'm going to get a cough drop here. I don't know that it'll help any, but again, I apologize for the raspy voice. I got a lot of emails this week. And I get a lot of emails. You guys, if I don't answer your email within 2 weeks, come looking for my body, okay? I generally can get them all answered in that amount of time. I get a lot of emails from people wanting interviews. I listen. I've got people that I'm in talks with about documentary movie type things, and then I have not custody, but guardianship over my brother, which takes up a good amount of my time. And I have, even though he doesn't live with me, and then I have 2 aging parents who are really struggling. So in addition to my own 3 children and their families and my husband and daily life. So don't feel like I'm mad at you, or, if you've been getting answers within the day and you don't get an answer for a week, don't feel like I'm mad at you. It's just my life is there. So if I'm the kind of person that if I were mad at you or you had offended me, Paul, how are you? If I were mad at you or if something you had said had bothered me, I would just directly tell you. I'm not a game player. Even my husband. This is how direct I am with my husband. Many of you know women, or are women who know women. Who, in order to get needed attention from a spouse, will create some sort of drama. And I've just never been that sort of person. And so if I feel like I'm needing attention from Don and he's distracted and I'm not getting that over a period of time that is now becoming detrimental to me, which can just be a few days depending on what's going on, or it can be longer. I just look at Donna and say, babe, I need some attention. And that's our cue. There's no drama. My wife has said she needs some attention, and we remedy that. We go have dinner together, we do something together, or he just sits and listens to me, what's going on. And I would encourage all women to be so direct with their spouses, because it's difficult for a man to know what you need unless you tell him. And game playing is not a great way to communicate with a man, or roundabout communications are often missed by men. But if you just look at a guy and say, hey, I know you're super busy with these other things right now that are pressing, but could you carve out some time for me because I need some attention? And I'll just always found that to work really well. So just a little advice from an old married gal. Good morning, Louise. Thank you for the compliment. Very sweet. This is going to drive me crazy. It's like hair sticking up. See if I can pull that down. But anyway, so we will begin our reading. There we go. Let me get my poop piled, for lack of a prettier way to say that. Okay, here we go. John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, Chapter 1. Let me get my screen up. Here we go. Wait. There we go. A few miles south of Soledad, the Salinas River drops in close to the hillside bank and runs deep and green. The water is warm, too, for it has slipped, twinkling over the yellow sands in the sunlight before reaching the narrow pool. On one side of the river, the golden foothill slopes curve up to the strong and rocky Gabilan Mountains, but on the valley side, the water is lined with trees, willows fresh and green with every spring, carrying in their lower leaf junctures and debris of the winter's flooding, and sycamores with mottled white recumbent limbs, and branches that arch over the pool. On the sandy bank under the trees, the leaves lie deep and so crisp that a lizard makes a great skittering if he runs among them. Rabbits come out of the brush to sit on the sand in the evening, and the damp flats are covered with the night tracks of coons and with the spread pads of dogs from the ranches, and with the split-wedged tracks of deer that come to drink in the dark. There is a path through the willows and among the sycamores, a path beaten hard by boys coming down from the ranches to swim in the deep pool, and beaten hard by tramps who come wearily down from the highway in the evening to jungle up near water. In front of the low horizontal limb of a giant sycamore, there is an ash pile made by many fires. The limb is worn smooth by men who have sat on it. Evening of a hot day started the little wind to moving among the leaves. The shade climbed up the hills toward the top. On the sandbanks, the rabbits sat as quietly as little gray sculptured stones. And then, from the direction of the state highway, came the sound of footsteps on crisp sycamore leaves. The rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. A stilted heron labored up into the air and pounded down the river. For a moment, the place was lifeless, and then 2 men emerged from the path and came into the opening by the green pool. They had walked in single file down the path, and even in the open, one stayed behind the other. Both were dressed in denim trousers and in denim coats with brass buttons. Both wore black, shapeless hats, and both carried tight blanket rolls slung over their shoulders. The first man was small and quick, dark of face, with restless eyes and sharp, strong features. Every part of him was defined: small, strong hands, slender arms, a thin and bony nose. Behind him walked his opposite, a huge man, shapeless of face, with large, pale eyes, with wide, sloping shoulders, and he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little, the way a bear drags his paws. His arms did not swing at his sides, but hung loosely. The first man stopped short in the clearing, and the follower nearly ran over him. He took off his hat and wiped the sweatband with his forefinger, and snapped the moisture off. His huge companion dropped his blankets and flung himself down and drank from the surface of the green pool. Drank with long gulps, snorting into the water like a horse. The small man stepped nervously beside him. "Lenny," he said sharply. "Lenny, for God's sakes, don't drink so much." Lenny continued to snort into the pool. The small man leaned over and shook him by the shoulder. "Lenny, you're going to be sick like you was last night." Lenny dipped his whole head under, hat and all, and then he sat up on the bank, and his hat dripped down on his blue coat and ran down his back. "That's good," he said. "You drink some, George. You take a big drink." He smiled happily. George unslung his bindle and dropped it gently on, I think that should be bundle, and dropped it gently on the bank. "I ain't sure it's good water," he said. "Looks kind of scummy." Lenny dabbled his big paw in the water and wiggled his fingers so the water arose in little splashes. Rings widened across the pool to the other side and came back again. Lenny watched them go. "Look, George, look what I done." George knelt beside the pool and drank from his hand with quick scoops. "Tastes all right," he admitted. "Don't really seem to be running, though. You never ought to drink water when it ain't running, Lenny," he said hopelessly. "You'd drink out of a gutter if you was thirsty." He threw a scoop of water into his face and rubbed it about with his hand under his chin and around the back of his neck. Then he replaced his hat, pushed himself back from the river, drew up his knees and embraced them. Lenny, who'd been watching, imitated George exactly. He pushed himself back, drew up his knees, embraced them, looked over to George to see whether he had it just right. He pulled his hat down a little more over his eyes, the way George's hat was. George stared morosely at the water. The rims of his eyes were red with sun glare. He said angrily, "We could just as well have rode clear to the ranch if that bastard bus driver knew what he was talking about." Just a little stretch down the highway," he says. "Just a little stretch. God dang near 4 miles. That's what it was. Don't want to stop at the ranch gate. That's what. Too god dang lazy to pull up. Wonder if he isn't too damn good to stop in Soledad at all. Kicks us out and says, just a little stretch down the road. I bet it was more than 4 miles. Damn hot day." Lenny looked timidly over to him. "George?" "Yeah, what do you want?" "Where are we going, George?" The little man jerked down the brim of his hat and scowled over at Lenny. "So you forget that already, did you? I gotta tell you again, do I? Jesus, you're a crazy bastard." "I forgot," Lenny said softly. "I tried not to forget. Honest to God, I did, George." Okay. I'll tell you again. I ain't got nothing to do. Might just as well spend all my time telling you things and then you forget 'em, and I tell you again. Tried and tried, said Lenny, but it didn't do no good. I remember about the rabbits, George. The hell with the rabbits. That's all you ever can remember is them rabbits. Okay, now you listen, and this time you got to remember so we don't get in no trouble. You remember setting in that gutter on Howard Street and watching that blackboard? Lenny's face broke into a delighted smile. Why, sure, George. I remember that. But what did we do then? I remember some girls come by and you say, the hell with what I says. You remember about us going into Murray and Reddy's and they give us work cards and bus tickets? Oh, sure, George. I remember that now. His hands went quickly into his side coat pockets. He said gently, George, I ain't got mine. I must have lost it. He looked down at the ground in despair. You never had none, you crazy bastard. I got both of them here. Think I'd let you carry your own work card? Lenny grinned with relief. I thought I put it in my side pocket. His hands went into the pocket again. George looked sharply at him. What'd you take out of that pocket? Ain't nothing in my pocket, Lenny said cleverly. I know there ain't. You got it in your hand. What you got in your hand? Hiding it? I ain't got nothing, George. Honest. Come on, give it here. Lenny held his closed hand away from George's direction. It's only a mouse, George. A mouse? A live mouse? Uh-huh. Just a dead mouse, George. I didn't kill it. Honest, I found it. I found it dead. Give it here, said George. Aw, leave me have it, George. Give it here. Lenny's closed hand slowly obeyed. George took the mouse and threw it across the pool to the other side among the brush. What do you want of a dead mouse anyways? I could pet it with my thumb while we walked along, said Lenny. Well, you ain't petting no mice while you walk with me. You remember where we're going now? Lenny looked startled and then in embarrassment hid his face against his knees. I forgot again. Jesus, George said resignedly. Well, look, we're going to work on a ranch like the one we came from up north. Up north? In Weed. Oh, sure, I remember in Weed. That ranch we're going to is right down there about a quarter mile. We're going to go in and see the boss. Now look, I'll give him the work tickets, but you ain't going to say a word. You just stand there and don't say nothing. If he finds out what a crazy bastard you are, we won't get no job. But if he sees you work before he hears you talk, we're set. You got that? Sure, George. Sure, I got it. Okay, now, when we go in to see the boss, what you gonna do? I, Lenny thought. His face grew tight with thought. I ain't gonna say nothing. Just gonna stand there. Good boy. That's swell. You say that over 2-3 times so you sure you won't forget it. Lenny droned to himself softly. I ain't gonna say nothing. I ain't gonna say nothing. I ain't gonna say nothing. Okay, said George. And you ain't gonna do no bad things like you done in Weed, neither. Lenny looked puzzled. Like I done in Weed? Oh, so you forgot that too, did you? Well, I ain't gonna remind you, fear you do it again. A light of understanding broke on Lenny's face. They run us out of Weed. Oh, they run us out of Weed, he exploded triumphantly. Run us out hell, said George disgustedly. We run. They was looking for us, but they didn't catch us. Lenny giggled happily. I didn't forget that, you bet. George lay back on the sand and crossed his hands under his head, and Lenny imitated him, raising his head to see whether he were doing it right. God, you're a lot of trouble, said George. I could get along so easy and so nice if I didn't have you on my tail. I could live so easy and maybe have a girl. For a moment, Lenny lay quiet, and then he said hopefully, We gonna work on a ranch, George? All right, you got that, but we're gonna sleep here because I got a reason. The day was going fast now. Only the tops of the Gabalin Mountains flamed with the light of the sun that had gone from the valley. A water snake slipped along on the pool, its head held up like a little periscope. The reeds jerked slightly in the current. Far off toward the highway, a man shouted something, and another man shouted back. The sycamore limbs rustled under a little wind that died immediately. George, why ain't we going on to the ranch and get some supper? They got supper at the ranch. George rolled on his side. No reason at all for you. I like it here. Tomorrow we're going to go to work. I seen thrashing machines on the way down. That means we'll be bucking grain bags, busting a gut. Tonight I'm going to lay right here and look up. I like it. Lenny got up on his knees and looked down at George. Ain't we going to have no supper? Sure we are, if you gather up some dead willow sticks. I got 3 cans of beans in my bindle. It must be bindle. You get a fire ready. I'll get you a match when you get the sticks together, then we'll heat the beans and have supper. Lenny said, I like beans with ketchup. Well, we ain't got no ketchup. You go get wood, and don't you fool around. It'll be dark before long. Lenny lumbered to his feet and disappeared in the brush. George lay where he was and whistled softly to himself. There were sounds of splashings down the river in the direction Lenny had taken. George stopped whistling and listened. "Poor bastard," he said softly, and then went on whistling again. In a moment, Lenny came crashing back through the brush. He carried one small willow stick in his hand. George sat up. "All right," he said brusquely. "Give me that mouse." But Lenny made an elaborate pantomime of innocence. "What mouse, George? I ain't got no mouse." George held out his hand. "Come on, give it to me. You ain't putting nothing over." Lenny hesitated, backed away, looked wildly at the brush line as though he contemplated running for his freedom. George said coldly, "You going to give me that mouse or do I have to sock you?" "Give you what, George?" "You know damn well what. I want that mouse." Lenny reluctantly reached into his pocket. His voice broke a little. "I don't know why I can't keep it. I ain't nobody's mouse. It ain't nobody's mouse. I didn't steal it. I found it lying right beside the road." George's hand remained outstretched imperiously. Slowly, like a terrier who doesn't want to bring a ball to its master, Lenny approached, drew back, approached again. George snapped his fingers sharply, and at the sound, Lenny laid the mouse in his hand. "I wasn't doing nothing bad with it, George, just stroking it." George stood up and threw the mouse as far as he could into the darkening brush, and then he stepped to the pool and washed his hands. "You crazy fool, don't you think I could see your feet was wet where you went across the river to get it?" He heard Lenny's whimpering cry and wheeled about. "Blubbering like a baby. Jesus, a big guy like you." Lenny's lip quivered and tears started in his eyes. "Oh, Lenny." George put his hand on Lenny's shoulder. "I ain't taking it away just for meanness. That mouse ain't fresh, Lenny, and besides, you broke it petting it. You get another mouse that's fresh, and I'll let you keep it a little while." Lenny sat down on the ground and hung his head dejectedly. "I don't know where there is no other mouse. I remember a lady used to give 'em to me, every one she got. But that lady ain't here." George scoffed. "Lady, huh? Don't even remember who that lady was. That was your Aunt Clara, and she stopped giving 'em to you. You always killed 'em." Lenny looked sadly up at him. They were so little," he said apologetically. "I'd pet 'em, and pretty soon they'd bit my fingers, and I pinched their heads a little, and then they was dead, 'cause they was so little." "I wish we'd get the rabbits pretty soon, George. They ain't so little." "The hell with rabbits, and you ain't to be trusted with no live mice. Your Aunt Clara give you a rubber mouse, and you wouldn't have nothing to do with it." "It wasn't no good to pet," said Lenny. The flame of the sunset lifted from the mountaintops, and dusk came into the valley, and a half-darkness came in and among the willows and the sycamores. A big carp rose to the surface of the pool, gulped air, and then sank mysteriously into the dark water again, leaving widening rings on the water. Overhead, the leaves whisked again, and little puffs of willow cotton blew down and landed on the pool's surface. "You going to get that wood?" George demanded. "There's plenty right up against the back of that sycamore. Floodwater wood. Now you get it." Lenny went behind the tree and brought out a litter of dried leaves and twigs. He threw them in a heap on the old ash pile and went back for more and more. It was almost night now. A dove's wings whistled over the water. George walked to the fire pile and lighted the dry leaves. The flame cracked up among the twigs and fell to work. George undid his bindle and brought out 3 cans of beans. He stood them about the fire, close in against the blaze, but not quite touching the flame. "There's enough beans for 4 men," George said. Lenny watched him from over the fire. He said patiently, "I like 'em with ketchup." Well, we ain't got any, George exploded. Whatever we ain't got, that's what you want. God Almighty, if I was alone, I could live so easy. I could go get a job and work and no trouble, no mess at all. And when the end of the month come, I would take my $50 and go into town and get whatever I want. Why, I could stay in a cat house all night. I could eat any place I want, hotel or any place, and order any damn thing I could think of. And I could do all that every damn month. Get a gallon of whiskey, or sit in a pool room and play cards or shoot pool. Lenny knelt and looked over the fire at the angry George, and Lenny's face was drawn with terror. And what I got, George went on furiously, I got you. You can't keep a job, and you lose me every job I get. Just keep me shoving all over the country all the time, and that ain't the worst. You get in trouble. You do bad things, and I gotta get you out. His voice rose nearly to a shout. You crazy son of a bitch, you keep me in hot water all the time. He looked on the elaborate manner of little girls when they are mimicking one another. Just wanted to feel that girl's dress. Just wanted to pet it like it was a mouse. Well, how the hell did she know you just wanted to feel her dress? She jerks back and you hold on like it was a mouse. She yells and we got to hide in an irrigation ditch all day with guys looking for us. And we got to sneak out in the dark and get out of the country all the time, something like that, all the time. I wished I could put you in a cage with about 1,000,000 mice and let you have fun. His anger left him suddenly. He looked across the fire at Lenny's anguished face, and then he looked ashamedly at the flames. It was quite dark now, but the fire lighted the trunks of the trees and the curving branches overhead. Lenny crawled slowly and cautiously around the fire until he was close to George. He sat back on his heels. George turned the bean can so that another side faced the fire. He pretended to be unaware of Lenny so close beside him. George, very softly. No answer. George! What do you want? I was only fooling, George. I don't want no ketchup. I wouldn't eat no ketchup if it was right here beside me. If it was here, you could have some. But I wouldn't eat none, George. I'd leave it all for you. You could cover your beans with it, and I wouldn't touch none of it. George still stared morosely at the fire. When I think of the sweet, swell time I could have without you, I go nuts. I never get no peace. Lenny still knelt. He looked off into the darkness across the river. George, you want I should go away, leave you alone? Where the hell could you go? Well, I could. I could go off in the hills there, someplace I'd find a cave. Yeah? How'd you eat? You ain't got sense enough to find nothing to eat. I'd find things, George. I don't need no nice food with ketchup. I'd lay out in the sun and nobody'd hurt me. And if I found a mouse, I could keep it. Nobody'd take it away from me. George looked quickly and searchingly at him. I been mean, ain't I? If you don't want me, I can go off in the hills and find a cave. I can go away any time. No, look, I was just fooling, Lenny, 'cause I want you to stay with me. Trouble with mice is you always kill 'em. He paused. Tell you what I'll do, Lenny. First chance, I'll give you a pup. Maybe you wouldn't kill it. That'd be better than mice, and you could pet it harder. Lenny avoided the bait. He had sensed his advantage. If you don't want me, you only just gotta say so, and I'll go off in those hills right there, right up in those hills and live by myself, and I won't get no mice stole from me. George said, I want you to stay with me, Lenny. Jesus, somebody shoot you for a coyote if you's by yourself. No, you stay with me. Your Aunt Clara wouldn't like you running off by yourself even if she is dead. Lenny spoke craftily. Tell me like you done before. Tell you what? About the rabbits. George snapped. You ain't going to put nothing over on me. Lenny pleaded. Come on, George, tell me, please. George, like you done before. You get a kick out of that, don't you? All right, I'll tell you, and then we'll eat our supper. George's voice became deeper. He repeated his words rhythmically as though he'd said them many times before. Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. They got no family. They don't belong no place. They come to a ranch and work up a stake, and then they go into town and blow their stake. And the first thing you know, they're pounding their tail on some other ranch. They ain't got nothing to look ahead to. Lenny was delighted. That's it. That's it. Now tell how it is with us. George went on. With us ain't like that. We got a future. We got somebody to talk to that gives a damn about us. We don't have to sit in no bar room blowing in our jack just 'cause we got no place else to go. If them other guys gets in jail, they can rot for all anybody gives a damn. But not us. Lenny broke in. But not us, and why? Because I got you to look after me, and you got me to look after you, and that's why. He laughed delightedly. Go on now, George. You got it by heart. You can do it yourself. No, you. I forget some of the things. Tell about how it's going to be. Okay. Someday we're going to get the jack together and we're going to have a little house and a couple acres and a cow and some pigs and living off the fat of the land, Lenny shouted. And have rabbits. Go on, George. Tell about what we're going to have in the garden and about the rabbits in the cages and about the rain in the winter and the stove and how thick the cream is on the milk like you can hardly cut it. Tell about that, George. Why don't you do it yourself? You know all of it. No, you tell it. Ain't the same if I tell it. Go on, George. How I get to tend the rabbits? Well, said George, we'll have a big vegetable patch and a rabbit hutch and chickens, and when it rains in the winter, we'll just say the hell with going to work. And we'll build up a fire in the stove and set round it and listen to the rain coming down on the roof. Nuts. He took out his pocket knife. I ain't got time for no more. He drove his knife through the top of one of the bean cans, sawed out the top, and passed the can to Lenny. Then he opened a second can. From his side pocket, he brought out 2 spoons and passed one of them to Lenny. They sat by the fire and filled their mouths with beans and chewed mightily. A few beans slipped out of the side of Lenny's mouth. George gestured with his spoon. What you gonna say tomorrow when the boss asks you questions? Lenny stopped, chewing, and swallowed. His face was concentrated. I ain't gonna say a word. Good boy. That's fine, Lenny. Maybe you're getting better. When we get the couple of acres, I can let you tend the rabbits all right, especially if you remember as good as that. Lenny choked with pride. I can remember, he said. George motioned with his spoon again. Look, Lenny, I want you to look around here. You can remember this place, can't you? The ranch is about a quarter mile up that way. Just follow the river. Sure, said Lenny. I can remember this. Didn't I remember about not going to say a word? Of course you did. Well, look, Lenny, if you just happen to get in trouble like you always done before, I want you to come right here and hide in the brush. Hide in the brush, Lenny said slowly. Hide in the brush till I come for you. Can you remember that? Sure I can, George. Hide in the brush till you come. But you ain't going to get in no trouble, 'cause if you do, I won't let you tend the rabbits. He threw his empty bean can off into the brush. I won't get in no trouble, George. I ain't going to say a word. Okay, bring your bindle over here by the fire. It's going to be nice sleeping here. Looking up in the leaves. Don't build up no more fire. We'll let her die down. They made their beds on the sand, and as the blaze dropped from the fire, the sphere of light grew smaller. The curling branches disappeared, and only a faint glimmer showed where the tree trunks were. From the darkness, Lenny called, "George, you sleep?" "No, what do you want?" "Let's have a different color rabbits, George." "Sure we will," George said sleepily. "Red and blue and green rabbits, Lenny, millions of 'em." "Furry ones, George, like I seen in the fair in Sacramento." "Sure, furry ones." "'Cause I can just as well go away, George, and live in a cave." "You can just as well go to hell," said George. "Shut up now." The next light dimmed on the coals. Up the hill from the river a coyote yammered, and a dog answered from the other side of the stream. The sycamore leaves whispered in a little night breeze. Good morning, Grandma Grateful. Chapter 2. The bunkhouse was a long rectangular building. Inside, the walls were whitewashed and the floor unpainted. In 3 walls, there were small square windows, and in the 4th, a solid door with a wooden latch. Against the walls were 8 bunks, 5 of them made up with blankets and the other 3 showing their burlap ticking. Over each bunk, there was nailed an apple box with the opening forward so that it made 2 shelves for the personal belongings of the occupant of the bunk. And these shelves were loaded with little articles, soap and talcum powder, razors, and those Western magazines ranchmen love to read and scoff at and secretly believe. And there were medicines on the shelves, and little vials, combs, and from nails on the box side a few neckties. Near one wall there was a black cast iron stove, its stovepipe going straight up through the ceiling. In the middle of the room stood a big square table littered with playing cards, and around it were grouped boxes for the players to sit on. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun threw a bright, dust-laden bar through one of the side windows, and in and out of the beam flies shot like rushing stars. The wooden latch raised, the door opened, and a tall, stoop-shouldered old man came in. He was dressed in blue jeans, and he carried a big push broom in his left hand. Behind him came George, and behind George, Lenny. "The boss was expecting you last night," the old man said. "He was sore as hell when you wasn't here to go out this morning." He pointed with his right arm, and out of the sleeve came a round, stick-like wrist, but no hand. "You can have them 2 beds there," he said, indicating 2 bunks near the stove. George stepped over and threw his blanket down on the burlap sack of straw that was a mattress. He looked into his box shelf and then picked a small yellow can from it. "Say, what the hell's this?" "I don't know," said the old man. "Says positively kills lice, roaches, and other scourges. What the hell kind of bed you giving us anyway? We don't want no pants rabbits." "Pants rabbits?" The old swamper shifted his broom and held it between his elbow and his side while he held out his hand for the can. He studied the label carefully. "Tell you what," he said finally, "last guy that had this bed was a blacksmith. Hell of a nice fella, and as clean a guy as you want to meet. Used to wash his hands even after he ate." "And how come he got graybacks?" George was working up a slow anger. Lenny put his bindle on the neighboring bunk and sat down. He watched George with his open mouth. "Tell you what," said the old swamper, "this here blacksmith named Whitey was the kind of guy that would put that stuff around even if there wa'n't no bugs, just to make sure, see? Tell you what he used to do at meals. He'd peel his boiled potatoes, and he'd take out every little spot, no matter what kind, before he'd eat it. And if there was a red splotch on an egg, he'd scrape it off. Finally quit about the food. That's the kind of guy he was. Clean. Used to dress up Sundays even when he wasn't going no place. Put on a necktie even, and then sit in the bunkhouse." "I ain't so sure," said George skeptically. "What'd you say he quit for?" The old man put the yellow can in his pocket, and he rubbed his bristly white whiskers with his knuckles. "Why, he just quit. The way a guy will. Says it was the food. Just wanted to move. Didn't give no other reason but the food. Just say, 'Give me my time one night,' the way any guy would." George lifted his tick and looked underneath it. He leaned over and inspected the sacking closely. Immediately, Lenny got up and did the same with his bed. Finally, George seemed satisfied. He unrolled his bindle and put things on the shelf, his razor and a bar of soap, his comb and bottle of pills, his liniment and leather wristband. Then he made his bed up neatly with blankets. The old man said, "I guess the boss will be out here in a minute. He's sure burned when you wasn't here this morning. Come right in when we was eating breakfast and says, 'Where the hell's them new men?' And he give the stable buck hell too." George patted a wrinkle out of his bed and sat down. "Give the stable buck hell?" he asked. "Sure, you see that stable buck's a nigger." Okay. This was the context of the time. I would never use that word. It is in the book, and I will say it. If it offends somebody, I pray that you would find it in your heart to forgive me for reading historical literature the way it was written, or period literature the way it was written. "Nigger, huh? Yeah, nice fella too. Got a crooked back where a horse kicked him. The boss give him hell when he's mad, but the stable buck don't give a damn about that. He reads a lot. Got books in his room." What kind of guy is this boss?" George asked. "Well, he's a pretty nice fella. Gets pretty mad sometimes, but he's pretty nice. Tell you what, know what he done Christmas? Bring a gallon of whiskey right in here and says, 'Drink hearty, boys. Christmas comes but once a year.'" "The hell he did. Whole gallon?" "Yes, sir. Jesus, we had fun. They let the nigger come in that night. Little Skinner named a Smitty took after the nigger. Done pretty good, too. The guys wouldn't let him use his feet, so the nigger got him. He could have used his feet, Smitty says. He would have killed the nigger. The guy said on account of the nigger's got a crooked back, Smitty can't use his feet." He paused in relish of the memory. "After that, the guys went into Soledad and raised hell. I didn't go in there. I ain't got the poop no more." Lenny was just finishing making his bed. The wooden latch raised again, and the door opened. A little stocky man stood in the open doorway. He wore blue jean trousers, a flannel shirt, a black unbuttoned vest, and a black coat. His thumbs were stuck in his belt, on each side of a square steel buckle. On his head was a soiled brown Stetson hat, and he wore high-heeled boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man. The old swamper looked quickly at him and then shuffled to the door, rubbing his whiskers with his knuckles as he went. "Them guys just come," he said, and shuffled past the boss and out the door. The boss stepped into the room with the short, quick steps of a fat-legged man. "I wrote Murray and Reddy I wanted 2 men this morning. You got your work slips?" George reached into his pocket and produced the slips and handed them to the boss. "It wasn't Murray and Reddy's fault. Says right here on the slip that you was to be here for work this morning." George looked down at his feet. "Bus driver give us a bum steer," he said. "We had to walk 10 miles. Says we was here when we wasn't. We couldn't get no rides in the morning." The boss squinted his eyes. "Well, I had to send out the grain team short 2 buckers. Won't do any good to go out till after dinner." He pulled his time book out of his pocket and opened it where a pencil was stuck between the leaves. George scowled meaningfully at Lenny, and Lenny nodded to show that he understood. The boss licked his pencil. "What's your name?" "George Milton." "And what's yours?" George said, His name's Lenny Small." The names were entered in the book. "Let's see, this is the 20th, noon the 20th. He closed the book. "Where you boys been working?" "Up around Weed," said George. You too, to Lenny. "Sorry, I got that backwards." "Yeah, him too," said George. The boss pointed a playful finger at Lenny. "He ain't much of a talker, is he?" "No, he ain't, but he's sure a hell of a good worker, strong as a bull." Lenny smiled to himself. "Strong as a bull," he repeated. George scowled at him, and Lenny dropped his head in shame at having forgotten. The boss said suddenly, "Listen, Small." Lenny raised his head. What can you do?" In a panic, Lenny looked at George for help. "He can do anything you tell him," said George. "He's a good skinner. He can wrestle grain bags, drive a cultivator. He can do anything. Just give him a try." The boss turned on George. "Then why don't you let him answer? Why are you trying to put over? What are you trying to put over?" George broke in loudly. "Oh, I ain't saying he's bright. He ain't. But I say he's a damn good worker. He can put up a 400-pound bale." The boss deliberately put the little book in his pocket. He hooked his thumb in his belt and squinted, one eye nearly closed. "Say, what you selling?" "Huh?" "I said, what stake you got in this guy? You talking his pay away from him?" "No, course I ain't. What you think, I'm selling him out?" "Well, I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. I just like to know what your interest is." George said, "He's my cousin. I told his old lady I'd take care of him. He got kicked in the head by a horse when he was a kid. He's all right, just ain't bright. But he can do anything you tell him." The boss turned half away. "Well, God knows he don't need any brains to buck barley bags. But don't you try to put nothing over, Milton. I got my eye on you. Why'd you quit and weed?" "Job was done," said George promptly. "What kind of job?" We was digging a cesspool." "Welcome, Angel." "All right, but don't try to put nothing over, 'cause you can't get away with nothing. I seen wise guys before go on out with the grain teams after dinner. They're picking up barley at the threshing machine. Go out with Slim's team." "Slim?" "Yeah, big, tall Skinner. You'll see him at dinner." He turned abruptly and went to the door. But before he went out, he turned and looked for a long moment at the two men. When the sound of his footsteps had died away, George turned on Lenny. "So you wasn't going to say a word. You's going to leave your big flapper shut and leave me to do the talking. Damn near lost us the job." Lenny stared hopelessly at his hands. "I forgot, George." "Yeah, you forgot. You always forget. And I got to talk you out of it." He sat down heavily on the bunk. "Now he's got his eye on us. Now we got to be careful and not make no slips. You keep your big flapper shut after this." He fell morosely silent. "George, what do you want now?" "I wasn't kicked in the head with no horse, was I, George?" "Be a damn good thing if you was," George said viciously. "Save everybody a hell of a lot of trouble." "You said I was your cousin, George." "Well, that was a lie, and I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself." He stopped suddenly, stepped to the open front door, and peered out. "Say, what the hell you doing listening?" The old man came slowly into the room. He had his broom in his hand, and at his heel there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, gray of muzzle and with pale, blind old eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down, grunted softly to himself, and licking his grizzled, moth-eaten coat. The swamper watched him until he was settled. "I wasn't listening. I was just standing in the shade a minute, scratching my dog. I just now finished swamping out the wash house." "You's poking your big ears into our business," George said. "I don't like nobody getting nosy." The old man looked uneasily from George to Lenny and then back. "I just come there," he said. "I didn't hear nothing you guys was saying. I ain't interested in nothing you was saying. A guy on a ranch don't ever listen, nor he don't ask no questions." "Damn right he don't," said George, slightly modified. "Not if he wants to stay working long." But he was reassured by the swamper's defense. "Come on in and set down a minute," he said. "That's a hell of an old dog." "Yeah, I had him ever since he was a pup. God, he was a good sheepdog when he was younger." He stood his broom against the wall and he rubbed his white bristled cheek with his knuckles. "How'd you like the boss?" he asked. "Pretty good, seemed all right." "He's a nice fella," the swamper agreed. "You got to take him right." At that moment, a young man came into the bunkhouse. A thin young man with a brown face, with brown eyes and a head of tightly curled hair. He wore a work glove on his left hand, and like the boss, he wore high-heeled boots. "Seen my old man?" he asked. The swamper said, "He's just here a minute ago, Curly. Went over to the cookhouse, I think." "I'll try to catch him," said Curly. His eyes passed over the new men, and he stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows, and his hands closed into fists. He stiffened and went into a slight crouch. His glance was at once calculating and pugnacious. Lenny squirmed under the look and shifted his feet nervously. Curly stepped gingerly close to him. "You the new guys old man was waiting for?" "We just come in," said George. "Let the big guy talk." Lenny twisted with embarrassment. George said, "Suppose he don't want to talk." Curly lashed his body around. "By Christ, he's got to talk when he's spoke to. What the hell you getting into it for?" "We travel together," said George coldly. "Oh, so it's that way." George was tense and motionless. "Yeah, it's that way." Lenny was looking helplessly to George for instruction. "And you won't let the big guy talk, is that it?" "He can talk if he wants to tell you anything." He nodded slightly to Lenny. We just coming in," said Lenny softly. Curly stared levelly at him. "Well, next time you answer when you're spoke to." He turned toward the door and walked out, and his elbows were still bent out a little. George watched him out, and then he turned back to the swamper. "Say, what the hell's he got on his shoulder? Lenny didn't do nothing to him." The old man looked cautiously at the door to make sure no one was listening. "That's the boss's son," he said quietly. "Curly's pretty handy. He done quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight, and he's handy." "Well, let him be handy," said George. "You don't have to take after Lenny. Lenny didn't do nothing to him. What's he got against Lenny?" The swamper considered. "Well, tell you what. Curly's like a lot of little guys. He hates big guys. He's all the time picking scraps with big guys. Kind of like he's mad at him because he ain't a big guy. You seen little guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy." "Sure," said George. "I seen plenty tough little guys, but this Curly better not make no mistakes about Lenny. Lenny ain't handy, but this Curly punk is going to get hurt if he messes around with Lenny." "Well, Curly's purty handy," the swamper said skeptically. "Never did seem right to me. Suppose Curly jumps a big guy and licks him. Everybody says what a game guy Curly is. And suppose he does the same thing and gets licked. Then everybody says the big guy ought to pick somebody his own size, and maybe they gang up on the big guy. Never did seem right to me. Seems like Curly ain't giving nobody a chance." George was watching the door. He said ominously, "Well, he better watch out for Lenny. Lenny ain't no fighter, but Lenny's strong and quick, and Lenny don't know no rules." He walked to the square table and sat down on one of the boxes. He gathered some of the cards together and shuffled them. The old man sat down on another box. Don't tell Curly I said none of this. He'd slough me. He just don't give a damn. Won't ever get canned 'cause his old man's the boss." George cut the cards and began turning them over, looking at each one and throwing it down on a pile. He said, "This guy Curly sounds like a son of a bitch to me. I don't like little mean little guys." "Seems to me like he's worse lately," said the swamper. "He got married a couple weeks ago. Wife lives over in the boss's house. Seems like Curly's cockier than ever since he got married." George grunted. "Maybe he's showing off for his wife." The swamper warmed to his gossip. "You seen that glove on his left hand?" "Yeah, I seen it." "Well, that glove's full of Vaseline." "Vaseline? What the hell for?" "Well, I tell you what. Curly says he's keeping that hand soft for his wife." George studied the cards absorbedly. "That's a dirty thing to tell around," he said. The old man was reassured. He had drawn a derogatory statement from George. He felt safe now, and he spoke more confidently. Wait till you see Curly's wife. George cut the cards again and put out a solitaire lay, slowly and deliberately. Purty? He asked casually. Yeah, purty, but... George studied his cards. But what? Well, she got the eye. Yeah? Married 2 weeks and got the eye? Maybe that's why Curly's pants is full of ants. I seen her give Slim the eye. Slim's a jerk-line skinner. Hell of a nice fella. Slim don't need to wear no high-heeled boots on a grain team. I seen her give Slim the eye. Curly never seen it, and I seen her give Carlson the eye. George pretended a lack of interest. Looks like we was going to have fun. The swamper stood up from his box. Know what I think? George did not answer. Well, I think Curly's married a tart. He ain't the first, said George. There's plenty done that. The old man moved toward the door, and his ancient dog lifted his head and peered about, and then got painfully to his feet to follow. I gotta be setting out the wash basins for the guys. The teams'll be in before long. You guys gonna buck barley? Yeah. You won't tell Curly nothing I said? Hell no. Well, you look her over, mister. You see if she ain't a tart. He stepped out the door into the brilliant sunshine. George laid down his cards thoughtfully, turned his piles of 3. He built 4 clubs on his ace pile. The sun square was on the floor now, and the flies whipped through it like sparks. A sound of jingling harness and the croak of heavy-laden axles sounded from outside. From the distance came a clear call. Stable buck! Oh, stable buck! And then, where the hell is that goddamn nigger? George stared at his solitaire lay, and then he flounced the cards together and turned around to Lenny. Lenny was lying down on the bunk watching him. Look, Lenny, this here ain't no setup. I'm scared. You're going to have trouble with that Curly guy. I seen that kind before. He's kind of feeling you out. He figures as he's got you scared and he's going to take a sock at you the first chance he gets. Lenny's eyes were frightened. I don't want no trouble, he said plaintively. Don't let him sock me, George. George got up and went over to Lenny's bunk and sat down on it. I hate that kind of bastard, he said. I seen plenty of 'em. Like the old guy says, Curly don't take no chances. He always wins. He thought for a moment. If he tangles with you, Lenny, we're going to get the can. Don't make no mistake about that. He's a boss's son. Look, Lenny, you try to keep away from him, will you? Don't never speak to him. If he comes in here, you move clear the other side of the room. Will you do that, Lenny? I don't want no trouble, Lenny mourned. I never done nothing to him. Well, that won't do you no good if Curly wants to plug himself up for a fighter. Just don't have nothing to do with him. Will you remember? Sure, George. I ain't going to say a word. The sound of the approaching grain teams was louder, thud of big hooves on hard ground, drag of brakes, and the jingle of traced chains. Men were calling back and forth from the teams. George, sitting on the bunk beside Lenny, frowned as he thought. Lenny said timidly, You ain't mad, George. I ain't mad at you. I'm mad at this here Curly bastard. I hope we's going to get a little stake together, maybe $100. His tone grew decisive. You keep away from Curly, Lenny. Sure I will, George. I won't say a word. Don't let him pull you in. But if the son of a bitch socks you, you let him have it. Let him have what, George? Never mind. I'll tell you when. Hate that kind of guy. Look, Lenny, if you get in any kind of trouble, you remember what I told you to do? Lenny raised up on his elbow, his face contorted with thought. Then his eyes moved sadly to George's face. If not get in any trouble, you ain't gonna let me tend the rabbits. That's not what I meant. You remember where we slept last night? Down by the river. Yeah, I remember. Oh, sure, I remember. I go there and hide in the brush. Hide till I come for you. Don't let nobody see you. Hide in the brush by the river. Say that over. Hide in the brush by the river. Down in the brush by the river. If you get in trouble. If and I get in trouble. A brake screeched outside. A call came. Stable Buck! Whoa, Stable Buck! George said, say it over to yourself, Lenny, so you won't forget. Both men glanced up, for the rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off. A girl was standing there looking in. She had full rouged lips and wide-spaced eyes, heavily made up. Her fingernails were red. Her hair hung in little rolled clusters like sausages. She wore a cotton house dress and red mules on the insteps of which were little bouquets of red ostrich feathers. I'm looking for Curly, she said. Her voice had a nasal, brittle quality. George looked away from her and then back. He's in here a minute ago, but he went. Oh. She put her hands behind her back and leaned against the door frame so that her body was thrown forward. You're the new fellas that just can't come, ain't you? Yeah. Lenny's eyes moved down over her body, and though she did not seem to be looking at Lenny, she bridled a little. She looked at her fingernails. Sometimes Curly's in here, she explained. George said brusquely, Well, he ain't now. If he ain't, I guess I better look someplace else, she said playfully. Lenny watched her, fascinated. George said, If I see him, I'll pass the word you's looking for him. She smiled archly and twitched her body. Nobody can't blame a person for looking, she said. There were footsteps behind her going by. She turned her head. Hi, Slim, she said. Slim's voice come through the door. Hi, good looking. I'm trying to find Curly, Slim. Well, you ain't trying very hard. I see him going in your house. She was suddenly apprehensive. Bye, boys, she called into the bunkhouse, and she hurried away. George looked around at Lenny. Jesus, what a tramp, he said. So that's what Curly picks for a wife. She's purty, said Lenny defensively. Yeah, and she's sure hiding it. She's sure hiding it. Curly got his work ahead of him. Bet she'd clear out for $20. Lenny still stared at the doorway where she had been. Gosh, she was purty. He smiled admiringly. George looked quickly down at him, and then he took him by an ear and shook him. Listen to me, you crazy bastard, he said fiercely. Don't you even take a look at that bitch. I don't care what she says and what she does. I seen him poison before, but I never seen no piece of jailbait worse than her. You leave her be. Lenny tried to disengage his ear. I never done nothing, George. No, you never. But when she was standing in the doorway showing her legs, you wasn't looking the other way neither. I never meant no harm, George. Honest, I never. Well, you keep away from her, 'cause she's a rat trap if I ever seen one. You let Curly take the rap. He's let himself in for it. Glove full of Vaseline, George said disgustedly. And I bet he's eating raw eggs and right into the patent medicine houses. Lenny cried out suddenly. I don't like this place, George. This ain't no good place. I want to get out of here. We got to keep it till we get a stake. We can't help it, Lenny. We'll get out just as soon as we can. I don't like it no better than you do. He went back to the table and set out a new solitaire hand. No, I don't like it, he said. For 2 bits, I'd shove out of here. If we could just a few dollars and a poke, we'll shove off and go up the American River and pay in gold. We can make a couple dollars a day there, and we might hit a pocket. Lenny leaned eagerly toward him. Let's go, George. Let's get out of here. It's mean here. "We gotta stay," George said shortly. "Shut up now. The guys'll be coming in." From the washroom nearby came the sounds of running water and rattling basins. George studied the cards. "Maybe we ought to wash up," he said. "But we ain't done nothing to get dirty." A tall man stood in the doorway. He held a crushed Stetson hat under his arm while he combed his long, black, damp hair straight back. Like the others, he wore blue jeans and a short denim jacket. When he had finished combing his hair, he moved into the room, and he moved with a majesty only achieved by royalty and master craftsmen. He was a jerkline skinner, the prince of the ranch, capable of driving 10, 16, even 20 mules with a single line to the leaders. He was capable of killing a fly on the wheeler's butt with a bullwhip without touching the mule. There was a gravity in his manner and a quiet so profound that all talk stopped when he spoke. His authority was so great that his word was taken on any subject, be it politics or love. This was Slim, the jerkline skinner. His hatchet face was ageless. He might have been 35 or 50. His ear heard more than was said to him, and his slow speech had overtones not of thought, but of understanding beyond thought. His hands, large and lean, were as delicate in their action as those of a temple dancer. He smoothed out his crushed hat, creased it in the middle, and put it on. He looked kindly at the two in the bunkhouse. "It's brighter'n a bitch outside," he said. "Can't hardly see nothin' in here. You the new guys?" "Just come," said George. "Gonna buck barley?" "That's what the boss says." Slim sat down on a box across the table from George. He studied the solitaire hand that was upside down to him. "Hope you get on my team," he said. His voice was very gentle. "I got a pair of punks on my team that don't know a barley bag from a blue ball. You guys ever bucked any barley?" "Hell yeah," said George. "I ain't nothing to scream about, but that big bastard there can put up more grain alone than most pears can." Lenny, who'd been following the conversation back and forth with his eyes, smiled complacently at the compliment. Slim looked approvingly at George for having given the compliment. He leaned over the table and snapped the corner of a loose card. "You guys travel around together?" His tone was friendly. It invited confidence without demanding it. "Sure," said George. "We kind of look after each other." He indicated Lenny with his thumb. "He ain't bright. Hell of a good worker, though. Hell of a nice fella, but he ain't bright. I've knew him for a long time." Slim looked through George and beyond him. "Ain't many guys travel around together," he mused. "I don't know why. Maybe everybody in the whole damn world's scared of each other." It's a lot nicer to go round with the guy you know," said George. A powerful, big-stomached man came into the bunkhouse. His head still dripped water from the scrubbing and dousing. "Hey, Slim," he said, and then stopped and stared at George and Lenny. "These guys just come," said Slim, by the way of introduction. "Glad to meet you," the big man said. "My name's Carlson. I'm George Milton, this here's Lenny Small." "Glad to meet you," Carlson said again. "Ain't very small." He chuckled softly at his joke. "Ain't small at all," he repeated. "Meant to ask you, Slim, how's your bitch? I seen she's under your wagon this morning." "She slang her pups last night," said Slim. 9 of 'em. I drowned 4 of 'em right off. She couldn't feed that many." "Got 5 left, huh?" "Yeah, 5. I kept the biggest." "What kind of dogs you think they gonna be?" "I don't know," said Slim. "Some kind of shepherds, I guess. That's the most kind I seen round here when she was in heat." Carlson went on. "Got 5 pups, huh? Gonna keep all of 'em?" "I don't know. Have to keep 'em a while so they can drink Lulu's milk." Carlson said thoughtfully, "Well, look at here, Slim. I've been thinking. That dog of Candy's is so damn old he can't hardly walk. Stinks like hell, too. Every time he comes into the bunkhouse, I can smell him for 2, 3 days. Why don't you get Candy to shoot his old dog and give him one of the pups to raise? I can smell that dog a mile away. Got no teeth, damn near blind, can't eat. Candy feeds him milk. He can't chew nothing else." George had been staring intently at Slim. Suddenly a triangle began to ring outside, slowly at first, and then faster and faster until the beat of it disappeared into one ringing sound. It stopped as suddenly as it had started. "There she goes," said Carlson. Outside there was a burst of voices as a group of men went by. Slim stood up slowly and with dignity. "You guys better come on while there's still something to eat. Won't be nothing left in a couple minutes." Carlson stepped back to let Slim precede him, and then the two of them went out the door. Lenny was watching George excitedly. George rumpled his cards into a messy pile. "Yeah," George said. "I heard him, Lenny. I'll ask him." "A brown and white one," Lenny cried excitedly. "Come on, let's get dinner. I don't know whether he's got a brown and white one." Lenny didn't move from his bunk. "You ask him right away, George, so he won't kill no more of 'em." "Sure, come on now, get up on your feet." Lenny rolled off his bunk and stood up, and the two of them started for the door. Just as they reached it, Curly bounced in. "You seen a girl around here?" he demanded angrily. George said coldly, "About half an hour ago, maybe." "Well, what the hell was she doing?" George stood still, watching the angry little man. He said insultingly, "She said she was looking for you." Curly seemed really to see George for the first time. His eyes flashed over George, took in his height, measured his reach, looked at his trim middle. "Well, which way'd she go?" he demanded at last. "I don't know," said George. "I didn't watch her go." Curly scowled at him and, turning, hurried out the door. George said, "You know, Lenny, I'm scared I'm going to tangle with that bastard myself. I hate his guts. Jesus, come on. There won't be no damn thing left to eat." "Good morning, Lady Be Good." They went out the front door. The sunshine lay in a thin line under the window. From a distance there could be heard a rattle of dishes. After a moment, the ancient dog walked lamely in through the open door. He gazed about with mild, half-blind eyes. He sniffed, and then lay down and put his head between his paws. Curly popped into the doorway again and stood looking into the room. The dog raised his head, but when Curly jerked out, the grizzled head sank to the floor again. Chapter 3. Although there was evening brightness showing through the windows of the bunkhouse, inside it was dusk. Through the open door came the thuds and occasional clangs of horseshoe game, and now and then the sound of voices raised in approval or derision. Slim and George came into the darkening bunkhouse together. Slim reached up over the card table and turned on the tin-shaded electric light. Instantly the table was brilliant with light, and the cone of the shade threw its brightness straight downward, leaving the corners of the bunkhouse still in dusk. Slim sat down on a box, and George took his place opposite. "It wasn't nothing," said Slim. "I would have had to drown most of 'em anyways. No need to thank me about that." George said, "It wasn't much to you maybe, but it was a hell of a lot to me. Jesus, I don't know how we're going to get him to sleep in here. He'll want to sleep right out in the barn with them. We'll have trouble keeping him from getting right in the box with them pups." "It wasn't nothing," Slim repeated. "Say, you sure was right about him. Maybe he ain't bright, but I never seen such a worker. He damn near killed his partner, Buck and Bartley. They ain't nobody can keep up with him. God almighty, I never seen such a strong guy." George spoke proudly. "Just tell Lenny what to do and he'll do it. Don't take no figuring. He can't think of nothing to do himself, but he sure can take orders." There was a clang of horseshoe on iron stake outside and a little cheer of voices. Slim moved back slightly so the light was not on his face. "Funny how you and him string along together." It was Slim's calm invitation to confidence. "What's funny about it?" George demanded defensively. "Oh, I don't know. Hardly none of the guys ever travel together. I hardly never seen two guys travel together. You know how the hands are. They just come in and get their bunk and work a month, and then they quit and go out alone. Never seemed to give a damn about nobody. Just seems kind of funny, a cuckoo like him and a smart little guy like you traveling together." "He ain't no cuckoo," said George. "He's dumb as hell, but he ain't crazy. And I ain't so bright neither. Or I wouldn't be bucking barley for my 50 and found. If I was bright, if I was even a little bit smart, I'd have my own little place and I'd be bringing in my own crops instead of doing all the work and not getting what comes out of the ground." George fell silent. He wanted to talk. Slim neither encouraged nor discouraged him. He just sat back quiet and receptive. "It ain't so funny, him and me going round together," George said at last. "Him and me was both born in Auburn. I knowed his Aunt Clara. She took him when he was a baby, raised him up. When his Aunt Clara died, Lenny just come along with me out working, got kind of used to each other after a little while." "Hmm," said Slim. George looked over at Slim and saw the calm, godlike eyes fastened on him. "Funny," said George. "I used to have a hell of a lot of fun with him. Used to play jokes on him, 'cause he's too dumb to take care of himself. But he was too dumb even to know he had a joke played on him. I had fun, made me seem damn smart alongside him. Why, he'd do any damn thing I told him. If I told him to walk over a cliff, over he'd go. That wasn't so damn much fun after a while. He never got mad about it, neither. I beat the hell out of him, and he could have bust every bone in my body just with his hands, but he never lifted a finger against me." George's voice was taking on the tone of confession. "Tell you what made me stop that. One day, a bunch of guys was standing round up on the Sacramento River. I was feeling pretty smart. I turned to Lenny and says, 'Jump in.' And he jumps. Couldn't swim a stroke. He damn near drowned before we could get him. And he was so damn nice to me for pulling him out. Clean forgot I told him to jump in. Well, I ain't done nothing like that no more." "He's a nice fella," said Slim. "Guys don't need no sense to be a nice fella. Seems to me sometimes it just works the other way around. Take a real smart guy and he ain't hardly ever a nice fella." George stacked the scattered cards and began to lay out his solitaire hand. The shoes thudded on the ground outside. At the windows, the light of the evening still made the window squares bright. "I ain't got no people," George said. "I seen the guys that go around on the ranches alone. They ain't no good. They don't have no fun. After a long time, they get mean. They get waiting to fight all the time." "Yeah, they get mean," Slim agreed. "They get so they don't want to talk to nobody." "Of course, Lenny's damn nuisance most of the time," said George. "But you get used to going round with the guy and you can't get rid of him." "He ain't mean," said Slim. "I can see Lenny ain't a bit mean." "Course he ain't mean, but he gets in trouble all the time 'cause he's so damn dumb. Like what happened in Weed." He stopped in the middle of turning over a card. He looked alarmed and peered over at Slim. "You wouldn't tell nobody?" "What'd he do in Weed?" Slim asked calmly. "You wouldn't tell?" "No, of course you wouldn't." "What'd he do in Weed?" Slim asked again. "Well, he seen this girl in a red dress. Dumb bastard like he is, he wants to touch everything he likes. Just wants to feel it. So he reaches out to feel this red dress, and the girl lets out a squawk, and that gets Lenny all mixed up, and he holds on because that's the only thing he can think to do. Well, this girl squawks and squawks. I was just a little bit off, and I heard all the yelling. So I comes a running, and by the time Lenny's so scared, all he can think to do is just hold on. I socked him over the head with a fence picket to make him let go. He's so scared he couldn't let go of that dress, and he's so damn strong, you know." Slim's eyes were level and unwinking. He nodded very slowly. "So, what happens?" George carefully built his line of solitaire cards. "Well, that girl rabbits in and tells the law she been raped. The guys in Weed start a party out to lynch Lenny, so we sit in the irrigation ditch underwater all the rest of the day. Got only our heads sticking out from the side of the ditch, and that night we scrammed out of there." Slim sat in silence for a moment. "Didn't hurt the girl none, huh?" he asked finally. "Hell no, he just scared her. I'd be scared too if he grabbed me, but he never hurt her. He just wanted to touch that red dress like he wants to pet the pups all the time." "He ain't mean," said Slim. "I can tell a mean guy a mile off. Course he ain't. And he'll do any damn thing I—" Lenny came in through the door. He wore his blue denim coat over his shoulder like a cape, and he walked hunched over. "Hi, Lenny," said George. "How'd you like the pup now?" Lenny said breathlessly, "He's brown and white, just like I wanted." He went directly to his bunk and lay down, and turned his face to the wall and drew up his knees. George put down his cards very deliberately. "Lenny," he said sharply. Lenny twisted his neck, looked over his shoulder. "Huh? What you want, George?" "I told you you couldn't bring that pup in here." "What pup, George? I got no pup." George went quickly over to him, grabbed him by the shoulder, and rolled him over. He reached down and picked up the tiny puppy from where Lenny had been concealing it against his stomach. Lenny sat up quickly. "Give 'em to me, George." George said, "You get right up and take this pup back to the nest. He got to sleep with his mother. You want to kill him? Just born last night and you taking him out of the nest. You take him back or I'll tell Slim not to let you have him." Lenny held out his hands pleadingly. "Give 'em to me, George. I'll take 'em back. I didn't mean no harm, George. Honest, I didn't. I just wanted to pet 'em a little." George handed the pup to him. "All right, you get him back there quick, and don't you take him out no more. You'll kill him. First thing you know." Lenny fairly scuttled out of the room. Slim had not moved. His calm eyes followed Lenny out the door. "Jesus," he said. "He just like a kid, ain't he?" "Sure, he's just like a kid. There ain't no more harm in him than a kid neither, 'cept he's so strong. I bet he won't come in here to sleep tonight. He'd sleep right alongside that box in the barn. Well, let him. He ain't doing no harm out there." It was almost dark outside now. Old Candy the swamper came in and went to his bunk, and behind him struggled his old dog. "Hello, Slim. Hello, George. Didn't either of you play horseshoes?" "I don't like to play every night," said Slim. Candy went on. "Either you guys got a slug of whiskey? I got a gut ache." "I ain't," said Slim. "I'd drink it myself if I had, and I ain't got a gut ache neither." "Got a bad gut ache," said Candy. "Them damn turnips give it to me. I knowed they's going to 'fore I ever ate 'em." The thick-bodied Carlson came in out of the darkening yard. He walked to the other end of the bunkhouse and turned on the second shaded light. "Darker'n hell in here," he said. "Jesus, how that nigger can pitch shoes." "He's plenty good," said Slim. "Damn right he is," said Carlson. "He don't give nobody else a chance to win." He stopped and sniffed the air, and still sniffing, looked down at the old dog. "God almighty, that dog stinks. Get him out of here, Candy. I don't know nothing that stinks as bad as an old dog. You got to get him out." Candy rolled to the edge of his bunk. He reached over and patted the ancient dog, and he apologized. "I've been round him so much I never notice how he stinks." "Well, I can't stand him in here," said Carlson. "That stink hangs around even after he's gone." He walked over with his heavy-legged stride and looked down at the dog. "Got no teeth," he said. "He's all stiff with rheumatism. He ain't no good to you, Candy, and he ain't no good to himself. Why don't you shoot him, Candy?" The old man squirmed uncomfortably. "Well, hell, I had him so long, had him since he was a pup. I herded sheep with him," he said proudly. "You wouldn't think it to look at him now, but he was the best damn sheepdog I ever seen." George said, "I seen a guy in Weed that had an Airedale could herd sheep. Learned it from the other dogs." Carlson was not to be put off. "Look, Candy, this old dog just suffers himself all the time. If you was to take him out and shoot him right in the back of the head—" He leaned over and pointed. "Right there. Why, he'd never know what hit him." Candy looked about unhappily. "No," he said softly. "No, I couldn't do that. I had him too long." He don't have no fun, Carlson insisted, and he stinks to beat hell. Tell you what, I'll shoot him for you. Then it won't be you that does it. Candy threw his legs off the bunk. He scratched the white stubble whiskers on his cheek nervously. I'm so used to him, he said softly. I had him from a pup. Well, you ain't being kind to him keeping him alive, said Carlson. Look, Slim's bitch got a litter right now. I bet Slim would give you one of them pups to raise up, wouldn't you, Slim? The Skinner had been studying the old dog with his calm eyes. Yeah, he said. You can have a pup if you want to. He seemed to shake himself free for speech. Carl's right, Candy. That dog ain't no good to himself. I wish somebody'd shoot me if I got old and a cripple. Candy looked helplessly at him, for Slim's opinions were law. Maybe it'd hurt him, he suggested. I don't mind taking care of him. Carlson said, the way I'd shoot him, he wouldn't feel nothing. I'd put the gun right there. He pointed with his toe, right back of the head. He wouldn't even quiver. Candy looked for help from face to face. It was quite dark outside by now. A young, laboring man came in. His sloping shoulders were bent forward, and he walked heavily on his heels, as though he carried the invisible grain bag. He went to his bunk and put his hat on his shelf. Then he picked a pulp magazine from his shelf and brought it to the light over the table. Did I show you this, Slim? He asked. Show me what? The young man turned to the back of the magazine, put it down on the table, and pointed with his finger. Right there, read it. Slim bent over it. Go on, said the young man. Read it out loud. Dear Editor, Slim read slowly, I read your mag for 6 years, and I think it is the best on the market. I like stories by Peter Rand. I think he's a wingding. Give us more like the Dark Rider. I don't write many letters. Just thought I would tell you I think your mag is the best dime's worth I ever spent. Slim looked up questioningly. What you want me to read that for? Witt said, Go on, read the name at the bottom. Slim read, Yours for Success, William Tenner. He glanced up at Witt again. Well, what you want me to read that for? Witt closed the magazine impressively. Don't you remember Bill Tenner? Worked here about 3 months ago. Slim thought, Little guy? Drove a cultivator? That's him, Witt cried. That's the guy. You think he's the guy who wrote this letter? I know it. Bill and me was in here one day, and Bill had one of them books that just come. He was looking in it, and he says, I wrote a letter. Wonder if they put it in the book, but it wasn't there. Bill says, maybe they're saving it for later, and that's just what they done. There it is. Huh, guess you're right, said Slim. Got it right in the book. George held out his hand for the magazine. Let's look at it. Witt found the place again, but he did not surrender his hold on it. He pointed out the letter with his forefinger, and then he went to his box shelf and laid the magazine carefully in. Wonder if Bill's seen it, he said. Bill and me worked in that patch of field peas, run cultivators, both of us. Bill was a hell of a nice fella. During the conversation, Carlson had refused to be drawn in. He continued to look down at the old dog. Candy watched him uneasily. At last Carlson said, If you want me to, I'll put the old devil out of his misery right now and get it over with. Ain't nothing left for him. Can't eat, can't see, can't even walk without hurting. Candy said hopefully, You ain't got no gun. Hell, I ain't. Got a Luger. It won't hurt him none at all. Candy said, Maybe tomorrow. Let's wait till tomorrow. I don't see no reason for it, said Carlson. He went to his bunk, pulled his bag from underneath it, and took out a Luger pistol. Let's get it over with, he said. We can't sleep with him stinking around in here. He put the pistol in his hip pocket. Candy looked a long time at Slim to try to find some reversal, and Slim gave him none. At last, Candy said softly and hopelessly, All right, take him. He did not look down at the dog at all. He lay back on his bunk and crossed his arms behind his head and stared at the ceiling. From his pocket, Carlson took a little leather thong. He stooped over and tied it around the old dog's neck. All the men except Candy watched him. Come, boy. Come on, boy, he said gently. And he said apologetically to Candy, "He won't even feel it." Candy did not move nor answer him. He twitched the thong. "Come on, boy." The old dog got slowly and stiffly to his feet and followed the gently pulling leash. Slim said, "Carlson." "Yeah." "You know what to do." "What you mean, Slim?" "Take a shovel," said Slim shortly. "Oh, yeah, sure, I get you." He led the dog out into the darkness. George followed to the door and shut the door and set the latch gently in place. Candy lay rigidly on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Slim said loudly, "One of my lead mules got a bad hoof. Got to get some tar on it." His voice trailed off. It was silent outside. Carlson's footsteps died away. The silence came into the room, and the silence lasted. George chuckled. "I bet Lenny's right out there in the barn with his pup. He won't want to come in here no more now he's got a pup." Slim said, "Candy, you can have any one of them pups you want." Candy did not answer. The silence fell on the room again. It came out of the night and invaded the room. George said, "Anybody like to play a little euchre?" "I'll play out a few with you," said Whit. They took places opposite each other at the table under the light, but George did not shuffle the cards. He rippled the edge of the deck nervously, and the little snapping noise drew the eyes of all the men in the room, so that he stopped doing it. The silence fell on the room again. A minute passed, and another minute. Candy lay still, staring at the ceiling. Slim gazed at him for a moment and then looked down at his hands. He subdued one hand with the other and held it down. There came a little gnawing sound from under the floor, and all the men looked down toward it gratefully. Only Candy continued to stare at the ceiling. "Sounds like there's a rat under there," said George. "We ought to get a trap down there." Whit broke out, "What the hell's taking him so long? Lay out some cards, why don't you? We ain't going to get no euchre played this way." George brought the cards together tightly and studied the backs of them. The silence was in the room again. A shot sounded in the distance. The men looked quickly at the old man. Every head turned toward him. For a moment, he continued to stare at the ceiling. Then he rolled slowly over and faced the wall and lay silent. George shuffled the cards noisily and dealt them. Whit drew a scoring board to him and set the pegs to start. Whit said, "I guess you guys really come here to work?" "How do you mean?" George asked. Whit laughed. "Well, you come on a Friday, you got 2 days to work till Sunday." "I don't see how you figure," said George. Whit laughed again. "You do if you've been around these big ranches much. Guy that wants to look over a ranch comes in on a Saturday afternoon. He gets Saturday night supper and 3 meals on Sunday, and he can quit Monday morning after breakfast without turning his hand. But you come to work Friday noon. You got to put in a day and a half no matter how you figure." George looked at him levelly. "We're going to stick around a while," he said. "Me and Lenny going to roll up a steak." The door opened quietly, and the stable buck put in his head, a lean Negro head lined with pain, the eyes patient. "Mr. Slim?" Slim took his eyes from old Candy. "Huh? Oh, hello, Crooks. What's the matter?" "You told me to warm up tar for that mule's foot. I got it warm." "Oh, sure, Crooks. I'll come right out and put it on." "I can do it if you want, Mr. Slim." "No, I'll come do it myself." He stood up. Crooks said, "Mr. Slim?" "Yeah." "That big new guy's messing around your pups out in the barn." "Well, he ain't doing no harm. I give him one of them pups." "Just thought I'd tell you," said Crooks. "He's taking him out of the nest and handling him. That won't do him no good." "He won't hurt him," said Slim. "I'll come along with you now." George looked up. "If that crazy bastard's fooling around too much, just kick him out, Slim." Slim followed the stable buck out of the rooms. George dealt, and Whit picked up his card and examined them. "Seen a new kid yet?" he asked. "What kid?" George asked. "Why, Curly's new wife." "Yeah, I seen her." "Well, ain't she a Lulu?" "I ain't seen that much of her," said George. Whit laid down his cards impressively. "Well, stick around and keep your eyes open. You'll see plenty. She ain't concealing nothing. I never seen nobody like her. She got the eye going all the time on everybody. I bet she even gives a stable buck the eye. I don't know what the hell she wants." George asked casually, "Been any trouble since you got here?" It was obvious that Whit was not interested in his cards. He laid his hand down and George scooped it in. George laid out his deliberate solitaire hand, 7 cards and 6 on top, and 5 on top of those. Whit said, "I see what you mean. No, they ain't been nothing yet. Curly's got yellow jackets in his drawers, but that's all so far. Every time the guy's around, she shows up. She's looking for Curly, or she thought she left something laying around and she's looking for it. Seems like she can't keep away from guys. And Curly's pants is just crawling with ants, but they ain't nothing come of it yet." George said, "She's going to make a mess. There's going to be a bad mess about her. She's a jailbait all set on the trigger. That Curly's got his work cut out for him. Ranch with a bunch of guys on it ain't no place for a girl, especially like her." Whit said, "If you got ideas, you ought to come on town with us guys tomorrow night." "Why? What's doing?" "Just the usual thing. We go into old Susie's place. Hell of a nice place. Old Susie's a laugh, always cracking jokes. Like she says when we come up on the front porch last Saturday night. Susie opens the door and then she yells over her shoulder, 'Get your coats on, girls. Here comes the sheriff.' She never talks dirty, neither. Got 5 girls there." "What's it set you back?" George asked. 2.5. You can get a shot for 2 bits. Susie got nice chairs to sit in, too. If a guy don't want to flop, why, he can just sit in the chairs and have a couple of 3 shots and pass the time of day, and Susie don't give a damn. She ain't rushing guys through and kicking them out if they don't want to flop." "Might go in and look the joint over," said George. "Sure, come along. It's a hell of a lot of fun. Her cracking jokes all the time. Like she says one time, she says, 'I knew people that if they got a rag rug on the floor and a Cupid doll lamp on the phonograph, they think they're running a parlor house.' That's that's Clara's house she's talking about. And Susie says, 'I know what you boys want,' she says. 'My girls is clean,' she says, 'and there ain't no water in my whiskey,' she says. 'If any of you guys want to look at a Cupid doll lamp and take your own chance getting burned, why, you know where to go.' And she says, 'There's guys around here walking bow-legged because they like to look at a Cupid doll lamp.'" George asked, "Clara runs the other house, huh?" "Yeah," said Whit. "We don't ever go there. Clara get $3 a crack and 35 cents a shot, and she don't crack no jokes. But Susie's place is clean, and she got nice chairs. Don't let no goo-goos in, neither." "Me and Lenny's rolling up a stake," said George. "I might go in and set and have a shot, but I ain't putting out no 2.5. "Well, a guy got to have some fun sometime," said Whit. The door opened, and Lenny and Carlson came in together. Lenny crept to his bunk and sat down, trying not to attract attention. Carlson reached under his bunk and brought out his bag. He didn't look at old Candy, who still faced the wall. Carlson found a little cleaning rod in the bag and a can of oil. He laid them on his bed and then brought out the pistol, took out the magazine, and snapped the loaded shell from the chamber. Then he fell to cleaning the barrel with the little rod. When the ejector snapped, Candy turned over and looked for a moment at the gun before he turned back to the wall again. Carlson said casually, "Curly been in yet?" "No," said Whit. "What's eating on Curly?" Carlson squinted down the barrel of his gun. "Looking for his old lady. I seen him going round and round outside." Whit said sarcastically, "He spends half his time looking for her, and the rest of the time she's looking for him." Curly burst into the room excitedly. "Any of you guys seen my wife?" he demanded. "She ain't been here," said Whit. Curly looked threateningly about the room. "Where the hell's Slim?" "Went out the barn," said George. "He's going to put some tar on Split Hoof." Curly's shoulders dropped and squared. "How long ago did he go?" 5, 10 minutes. Curly jumped out the door and banged it after him. Whit stood up. "I guess maybe I'd like to see this," he said. "Curly just spoiling or he wouldn't start for Slim. And Curly's handy. Damn handy. Got in the finals for the Golden Gloves. He got newspaper clippings about it." He considered. "But just the same, he better leave Slim alone. Nobody don't know what Slim can do." "Thinks Slim's with his wife, don't he?" said George. "Looks like it," Whit said. Course Slim ain't. At least I don't think Slim is, but I like to see the fuss if it comes off. Come on, let's go. George said, I'm staying right here. I don't want to get mixed up in nothing. Lenny and me got to make a stake. Carlson finished the cleaning of the gun and put it in the bag and pushed the bag under his bunk. I guess I'll go out and look her over, he said. Old Candy lay still, and Lenny, from his bunk, watched George cautiously. When Whit and Carlson were gone and the door closed after them, George turned to Lenny. What you got on your mind? I ain't done nothing, George. Slim says I better not pet them pups so much for a while. Slim says they ain't good for 'em. So I come right in. I've been good, George. I could have told you that, said George. Well, I wasn't hurting 'em none. I just had mine in my lap, petting it. George asked, Did you see Slim out in the barn? Sure I did. He told me I better not pet that pup no more. Did you see that girl? You mean Curly's girl? Yeah, did she come in the barn? No, anyway, I never seen her. You never seen Slim talking to her? Uh-uh. She ain't been in the barn. Okay, said George. I guess them guys ain't gonna see no fight. If there's any fighting, Lenny, you keep out of it. I don't want no fights, said Lenny. He got up from his bunk and sat down at the table across from George. Almost automatically, George shuffled the cards and laid out his solitaire hand. He used a deliberate, thoughtful slowness. Lenny reached for a face card and studied it, then turned it upside down and studied it. Both ends the same, he said. George, why is it both ends the same? I don't know, said George. That's just the way they make 'em. What was Slim doing in the barn when you seen him? Slim? Sure, you seen him in the barn, and he told you not to pet the pups so much. Oh, yeah. He had a can of tar and a paintbrush, and I don't know what for. You sure that girl didn't come in like she comes in here today? No, she never come. George sighed. You give me a good whorehouse every time, he said. A guy can go in and get drunk and get everything out of his system all at once and no messes. And he knows how much is going to set him back. These here jailbaits is just set on the trigger of the hooskow. Lenny followed his words admiringly and moved his lips a little to keep up. George continued. You remember Andy Cushman, Lenny? Went to grammar school? The one that his old lady used to make hot cakes for the kids? Lenny asked. Yeah, that's the one. You can remember anything if there's anything to eat in it. George looked carefully at the solitaire hand. He put an ace up on his scoring rack and piled a 2, 3, and 4 diamonds on it. Andy's in San Quentin right now on account of a tart, said George. Lenny drummed on the table with his fingers. George? Huh? George, how long it gonna be till we get that little place and live on the fat of the land and the rabbits? I don't know, said George. We got to get a big stake together. I know a little place we can get cheap, but they ain't giving it away. Old Candy turned slowly over. His eyes were wide open. He watched George carefully. Lenny said, Tell about that place, George. I just told you just last night. Go on, tell again, George. Well, it's 10 acres, said George. Got a little windmill, got a little shack on it, a chicken run. Got a kitchen, orchard, cherries, apples, peaches, cots, nuts. Got a few berries. They's a place for alfalfa and plenty of water to flood it. They's a pig pen. And rabbits, George. No place for rabbits now, but I could easily build a few hutches and you could feed alfalfa to the rabbits. Damn right I could, said Lenny. You gosh dang right I could. George's hand stopped working with the cards. His voice was growing warmer. And we could have a few pigs. I could build a smokehouse like the one Grandpa had. And when we kill a pig, we can smoke the bacon and the hams and make sausage and all like that. And when the salmon run up river, we could catch 100 of them and salt them down or smoke them. We could have them for breakfast. There ain't nothing so nice as smoked salmon. When the fruit come in and we could can it, and tomatoes, they're easy to can. Every Sunday we'd kill a chicken or a rabbit. Maybe we'd have a cow or a goat, and the cream is so damn thick you gotta cut it with a knife and take it out with a spoon. Lenny watched him with wide eyes, and old Candy watched him too. Lenny said softly, "We could live off of the fat of the land." "Sure," said George. "All kinds of vegetable in the garden, and if we want a little whiskey, we can sell a few eggs or something or some milk. We'd just live there. We'd belong there. There wouldn't be no more running round the country and getting fed by a Jap cook. No, no, sir, we'd have our own place where we belonged and not sleep in no bunkhouse." "Tell about the house, George," Lenny begged. "Sure, we'd have a little house and a room to ourself, little fat iron stove, and in the winter we'd keep a fire going in it. It ain't enough land so we'd have to work too hard, maybe 6, 7 hours a day. We wouldn't have to buck no barley 11 hours a day. And when we put in a crop, why, we'd be there to take the crop up. We'd know what come of our planting." "And rabbits," Lenny said eagerly, "and I'd take care of 'em. Tell how I'd do that, George." "Sure, you'd go out in the alfalfa patch and you'd have a sack, and you'd fill up the sack and bring it in and put in the rabbit cages." "They'd nibble and they'd nibble," said Lenny. "The way they do, I'd seen 'em." "Every 6 weeks or so," George continued, "them does would throw a litter so we'd have plenty of rabbits to eat and to sell, and we'd keep a few pigeons to go flying round the windmill like they done when I was a kid." He looked raptly at the wall over Lenny's head. "And it'd be our own, and nobody could can us. If we don't like a guy, we can say, 'Get the hell out,' and by God, he'd got to do it. And if a friend come along, why, we'd have an extra bunk, and we'd say, 'Why don't you spend the night?' And by God, he would. We'd have a setter dog and a couple striped cats, but you gotta watch out them cats don't get the little rabbits." Lenny breathed hard. "You just let 'em try to get the rabbits. I'll break their goddamn necks. I'll smash 'em with a stick." He subsided, grumbling to himself, threatening the future cats which might dare to disturb the future rabbits. George sat entranced with his own picture. When Candy spoke, they both jumped up as though they had been caught doing something reprehensible. Candy said, "You know where's a place like that?" George was on guard immediately. "Suppose I do. What's that to you?" You don't need to tell me where it's at. Might be any place." "Sure," said George. "That's right. You couldn't find it in 100 years." Candy went on excitedly. "How much they want for a place like that?" George watched him suspiciously. "Well, I could get it for $600. The old people that owns it is flat bust, and the old lady need an operation. Say, what's it to you? You got nothing to do with us." Candy said, "I ain't much good with only one hand. I lost my hand right here on this ranch. That's why they give me a job, swamping. And they give me $250 because I lost my hand. And I got 50 more saved up right in the bank right now. That's 300. And I got 50 more coming the end of the month. Tell you what." He leaned forward eagerly. "Suppose I went in with you guys. That's $350 I'd put in. I ain't much good, but I could cook and tend the chickens and hoe the garden some. How'd that be?" George half closed his eyes. "I got to think about that. We was always going to do it by ourselves." Candy interrupted him. "I'd make a will and leave my share to you guys in case I kick off, 'cause I ain't got no relatives or nothing. You guys got any money? Maybe we could do it right now." George spat on the floor disgustedly. "We got $10 between us." Then he said thoughtfully, "Look, if me and Lenny work a month and don't spend nothing, we'll have $100. That'd be $450. I bet we could swing her for that. Then you and Lenny could go get her started, and I'd get a job and make up the rest, and you could sell eggs and stuff like that." They fell into silence. They looked at one another amazed. This thing they had never really believed in was coming true. George sat reverently. "Jesus, I bet we could swing her." His eyes were full of wonder. "I bet we could swing her." he repeated softly. Candy sat on the edge of the bunk. Hi, Steve. Candy sat on... Come here, buddy. You can't play with that. Oh, yeah. Candy sat on the edge of the bunk. He scratched the stump of his wrist nervously. I got hurt 4 years ago, he said. They'll can me pretty soon. Just as soon as I can't swamp out no bunkhouses, they'll put me on the county. Maybe if I give you guys my money, you'll let me hoe in the garden, and even after I ain't no good at it. And I'll wash dishes and little chicken stuff like that, but I'll be on our own place, and I'll be let to work on our own place, he said miserably. You seen what they done to my dog tonight? They say he wasn't no good to himself nor nobody else. When they can me here, I wish somebody'd shoot me, but they won't do nothing like that. I won't have no place to go, and I can't get no more jobs. I'll have $30 more coming time you guys is ready to quit. George stood up. We'll do her, he said. We'll fix up that old place and we'll go live there. He sat down again. They all sat still, all bemused by the beauty of the thing. Each mind was popped into the future when this lovely thing should come about. George said wonderingly, Suppose they was a carnival or a circus come to town or a ball game or any damn thing. Old Candy nodded in appreciation of the idea. We'd just go to her, George said. Wouldn't ask nobody if we could, just say, well, go to her. And we would. Just milk a cow and sling some grain to the chickens and go to her. And put some grass to the rabbits, Lenny broke in. I would never forget to feed 'em. When we going to do it, George? In 1 month. Right squawk in 1 month. Know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write to them old people that owns a place that will take it, and Candy'll send $100 to bind her. Sure will, said Candy. They got a good stove there? Sure, got a nice stove. Burns coal or wood. I'm going to take my pup, said Lenny. I bet by Christ he likes it there, by Jesus. Voices were approaching from outside. George said quickly, Don't tell nobody about it. Just us three and nobody else. They're liable can us, so we can't make no stake. Just go on like we was going to buck barley the rest of our lives. Then all of a sudden, someday, we'll go get our pay and scram out of here. Lenny and Candy nodded, and they were grinning with delight. Don't tell nobody, Lenny said to himself. Candy said, George, I ought to have shot that dog myself, George. I shouldn't ought to let no stranger shoot my dog. The door opened. Slim came in, followed by Curly and Carlson and Whit. Slim's hands were black with tar, and he was scowling. Curly hung close to his elbow. Curly said, Well, I didn't mean nothing, Slim. I just asked you. Slim said, Well, you've been asking me too often. I'm getting damn sick of it. If you can't look after your own damn wife, what you expect me to do about it? You lay off of me. I'm just trying to tell you I didn't mean nothing, said Curly. I just thought you might have saw her. Why don't you tell her to stay the hell home where she belongs, said Carlson. You let her hang around a bunkhouses, and pretty soon you're going to have something on your hands and you won't be able to do nothing about it. Curly whirled on Carlson. You keep out of this unless you want to step outside. Carlson laughed. You damn punk, he said. You tried to throw a scare into Slim, and you couldn't make it stick. Slim throwed a scare into you. You're yellow as a frog belly. I don't care if you're the best welter in the country. You come for me, and I'll kick your damn head off. Candy joined the attack with joy. Glove full of Vaseline, he said disgustedly. Curly glared at him. His eyes slipped on past and lighted on Lenny, and Lenny was still smiling with delight at the memory of the ranch. Curly stepped over to Lenny like a terrier. What the hell are you laughing at? Lenny looked blankly at him. Huh? Then Curly's rage exploded. Come on, you big bastard. Get up on your feet. No big son of a bitch is going to laugh at me. I'll show you who's yella. Lenny looked helplessly at George, and then he got up and tried to react. Curly was balanced and poised. He slashed at Lenny with his left and then smashed down his nose with the right. Lenny gave a cry of terror. Blood welled from his nose. George, he cried. Make 'em let me alone, George. He backed until he was against the wall, and Curly followed, slugging him in the face. Lenny's hands remained at his sides. He was too frightened to defend himself. George was on his feet, yelling, "Get him, Lenny! Don't let him do it!" Lenny covered his face with his huge paws and bleated with terror. He cried, "Make 'em stop, George!" Then Curly attacked his stomach and cut off his wind. Slim jumped up. "The dirty little rat," he cried. "I'll get him myself." George put out his hand and grabbed Slim. "Wait a minute," he shouted. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Get him, Lenny." Lenny took his hands away from his face and looked about for George, and Curly slashed at his eyes. The big face was covered with blood. George yelled again, "I said get him!" Curly's fist was swinging when Lenny reached for it. The next minute, Curly was flopping like a fish on a line, and his closed fist was lost in Lenny's big hand. George ran down the room. "Let go of him, Lenny! Let go!" But Lenny watched in terror the flopping little man whom he held. Blood ran down Lenny's face. One of his eyes was cut and closed. George slapped him in the face again and again, and still Lenny held on to the closed fist. Curly was white and shrunken by now, and his struggling had become weak. He stood crying, his fist lost in Lenny's paw. George shouted over and over again, "Let go his hand, Lenny, let go! Slim, come help me while the guy got any hand left." Suddenly, Lenny let go of his hold. He crouched, cowering against the wall. "You told me to, George," he said miserably. Curly sat down on the floor, looking in wonder at his crushed hand. Slim and Carlson bent over him. Then Slim straightened up and regarded Lenny with horror. "We got to get him into a doctor," he said. "Looks to me like every bone in his hand is bust." "I didn't wanna," Lenny cried. "I didn't want to hurt him." Slim said, "Carlson, you get the candy wagon hitched up. We'll take him on to Soledad and get him fixed up." Carlson hurried out. Slim turned to the whimpering Lenny. "It ain't your fault," he said. "This Puck sure had it coming, but Jesus, he ain't hardly got no hand left." Slim hurried out and in a moment returned with a tin cup of water. He held it to Curly's lips. George said, "Slim, will we get canned now? We need the steak. Will Curly's old man can us now?" Slim smiled wryly. He knelt down beside Curly. "You got your senses in hand enough to listen?" he asked. Curly nodded. "Well, then listen." Slim went on. "I think you got your hand caught in a machine. If you don't tell nobody what happened, we ain't going to. But you just try to get this guy a can, and we'll tell everybody, and then you'll get the laugh." "I won't tell," said Curly. He avoided looking at Lenny. Buggy wheels sounded outside. Slim helped Curly up. Come on now. Carlson's going to take you to a doctor." He helped Curly out the door. The sound of wheels drew away. In a moment, Slim came back into the bunkhouse. He looked at Lenny, still crouched fearfully against the wall. "Let's see your hands," he said. Lenny stuck out his hands. "Christ almighty, I hate to have you mad at me," Slim said. George broke in. "Lenny was just scared," he explained. "He didn't know what to do. I told you nobody ought never to fight him. No, I guess it was Candy I told." Candy nodded solemnly. "That's just what you done," he said. "Right this morning when Curly first lit into your friend, you says he better not fool with Lenny if he knows what's good for him. That's just what you says to me." George turned to Lenny. "It ain't your fault," he said. "You don't need to be scared no more. You done just what I told you to. Maybe you better go in the washroom, clean up your face. You look like hell." Lenny smiled with his bruised mouth. "I didn't want no trouble," he said. He walked to the door, but just before he came to it, he turned back. "George." "What you want?" "I can still tend the rabbits, George." "Sure, you ain't done nothing wrong." I didn't mean no harm, George." "Well, get the hell out and wash your face." Chapter 4, and that's where we'll stop. All right, guys. We've not done a fiction novel, so I hope you guys are enjoying it. There's no way I'm ever going to get and remember the voices of each character, so I just do the best I can. This is why I avoid character reading, because it is difficult to express the voices appropriately and in a way that people can follow. But I think the reason that this book, I read it in high school, and I think the reason that it just has held this quiet place in my heart for so many years is because I have a brother who's disabled. And I'll tell you a story about John that is so much like what we read today. It was coming back up in my mind as I was reading. So when we were in high school, I'm trying to think of how this situation played out. I think that buses would line up between the two buildings. And so I had gotten on at the back, and there had been this boy. I cannot remember if it was at my school or if John went to a different school for kids with intellectual disabilities. Because that was true part of my life. And then another part of my life, he went to the same school, but was they kept them in their own classroom. They weren't integrated into the population of kids without disabilities. So he had come home one day crying because this boy had kept calling him a pussy and shoving him and messing with him. And John was scared to fight him. And John was a lot like Lenny. John was slow and sweet and just a big teddy bear. But I knew that he had it in him to open up a can of whoop ass should he ever decide to do it. But he was just gentle with people and very forgiving and didn't want to fight and he just wanted to avoid trouble. Well, every day when he would get on the bus, the kids would slide to the inside of the aisle from their seat so that he couldn't sit with them because they didn't want the retard sitting with him, is what they would say. And so I always kept a spot for John, and John would sit with me. And it always just went all over me. But what was I going to do? Fight every kid on the bus? And I've been in a lot of fights, and every fight I've been in, save one, was over my brother. And so we pull up, and there's this kid, and he's shoving John. And John, so back then, I don't know if you guys remember this, but back then in the 80s, it was geeky to carry a backpack. You carried all your books and your papers and hoped you didn't drop them. Nobody carried backpacks. But mom had one for John because he had trouble keeping track of stuff. And so he's got his backpack and his lunchbox, and this kid's shoving him, and he's saying, come on, pussy, come on, hit me. You're a pussy, and he keeps saying this to my brother. And I saw for the first time how this kid was belittling and intimidating my brother. And I opened the bus window, and I'm half hanging out, and I yelled, John, beat his ass. So John does his arm like this, and his backpack falls down his arm, and his lunchbox falls down his arm. I swear on my life, he does. And he starts pummeling this kid. I mean, he's got him up against the bus, and he is just wailing on him. And this teacher comes to try and stop him. But John is so, finally indulging in this rage that this kid had caused in him. And I don't think he noticed that it was actually a teacher. And he throws his arm out where the teacher had tried to grab him and throws the teacher. And the teacher falls to the ground. And I'm like, John, that's enough. Get it. Stop, buddy. Stop. Get in the bus. Get in the bus. Because I knew he was going to get in trouble. And back then, if a kid had been bullying you and the teachers knew about it, they often let it resolve this way because it truly was the best way to resolve it. If a teacher tells the kid not to bully you, then you just get picked on more because you went to the teacher. And so a lot of times they let us kids solve it, and we didn't have school shootings back then. And I'm not saying that kids should be violent and get into fights, but at some point you have to stand up for yourself. And my opinion has always been, do that immediately, and then you avoid, having to get into some big fist fight. Pop someone initially when they do that, and they'll know that you're not the kid to pick on, and they'll move on to somebody else. But I wasn't that wise as a kid. I was scared, and I got bullied. So John gets on the bus, right? He's still got his backpack down in the elbow of his arm where it slipped down, and he's still got his lunchbox. And all these kids who had moved to the side of the aisle or to the, close to the aisle so he couldn't sit, slid over so he could sit down. And he still came back and sat with me. And I just was never so proud of him for taking up for himself because people picked on him mercilessly. Teachers picked on him. One day I was coming down the hall, and this was at Granbury High School in Granbury, Texas. I'm coming down the hall, and there was this little cutout of the building, and that's where the special ed kids were. So I could hear a bunch of kids laughing and carrying on, and teachers laughing and carrying on. So as I walked, I looked down that hall, And John is on the floor on all fours, crawling around like a dog, barking at their request. And they've got their books stacked on his back. And they're like, bark, dog, bark, bark, carry our books, dog. And the teachers are laughing. And I just lost it. And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you people? John, get up. And he's like, what? They're my friends. I said, they are not your friends. Get up. And so he gets up and I'm like, get over here. So he, kind of like George is with Lenny, he just enraged that the person that Lenny can't see it. I was enraged that John couldn't see it. Not so much at John, but at the world, I guess. And so he comes over and I'm like, you guys are disgusting. That's awful. You don't treat a human being like that. And so I don't remember. I think we might have left school. I don't know if it was the end of the day or what had happened. But I mean, his whole life, people did mean things like that and called him retard and stupid and, just cruel. I mean, that's like kicking a puppy because he still remembers all of that. He remembers the kids that picked on him and he remembers how sad that was for him. And with a large, to the degree that I've seen him tear up over it when he tells it. And I just see that as that, when he beat that kid up at the bus, was that one time he got justice, was the one time that the retard, such an awful, filthy word, got justice, and I feel that for Lenny as I'm reading. I feel so sorry for Lenny. He's a good-hearted guy. He just doesn't know his own strength. He's not wise enough to stay out of trouble. He's thinking in the moment. He has a hard time remembering the rules. And boy, George has got a hard journey to keep Lenny safe for that reason. When he grabbed the girl's dress, he wasn't trying to do anything malicious to the girl, but you can see where it would scare the girl because he wouldn't let go. And, they get run out. And, I've been in situations where I've had to fight for my brother and I'm no longer welcome in that place because I've fought. And so I just really relate to George trying to make a life for them and trying to take care of, to this day, I take care of my brother. From the time I was little, I remember, helping him with his homework first because he struggled so much. And so I would help him with his homework and I'd be up till 11 doing my homework. I just have had this attachment to him since childhood, and we had our spats and stuff. But it was one thing for me to say something to John or to do something to John. Nobody else was going to get away with it. And I think we can all relate to that if we've got siblings, especially younger siblings. John's older than me, but because of his mental state was always younger than me, if you know what I mean. And, I always used to say, forgive me for beating up this one girl that I beat up in high school for being particularly cruel to John. But I have it in my head, sorry, not sorry. Because somebody needed to take her down a peg because she was bullying everybody in the school. And I think I'm the only one who ever stood up to her and fought her. But she was just a horrible human being. She's not much better human being today. And I kind of hoped that it would remedy some of that in her, but sadly we make our own choices and that's the way it goes. But anyway, it is 12:44. That's what we have for today, up to chapter 4. Next Wednesday, we will read from there, John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. Great, great book. I want to thank you guys for joining. Please remember Wednesday mornings at 10:30 is book club. Friday afternoons at 4:30 is the Nurse Penny podcast. Saturdays are kind of on hold right now. Frida and her husband decided, they're realtors, and they decided that they were not going to renew their contract with the company that they were with. And so they're going to strike out on their own and start their own real estate company. And so we're probably not going to get her once a month, but I'll try to get her in when we can. And if not, I'll think of another show we can do. Just neither one of us saw this coming. And starting your own business, without a nest, without having a huge amount of money to start it, means they're going to have to work very hard to get it going and keep it going. And I'm blessing her as she does that. She'll be on, but it'll be sporadic. I feel like. But anyway, I love Frida and we had a fun show with her. And so she'll be back. Don't worry. And I'll keep you posted when I get a date for that. So let me just pray us out. I will see you guys on Friday at 4:30. I did check yesterday to see if the uh, Two Girls, One Ghost podcast had posted the interview we did, and it's still in edits. I did check on the Anthony Cheen documentary. It's still in edits. So I don't have anything else to report as far as things coming up on the near death front for you guys to watch. And for those of you who are new, I had a near death experience. I'm not near dying, just in case. All right, let me pray us out. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and for this novel and John Steinbeck's just his style of writing is just so good for the soul. And I just thank you that people would come and join and that we could read novels and learn higher truths from them. And God, you had impressed on me the other day. I just heard you saying in my spirit, when I asked you, how can I affect the world for you? And you said, stories, Penny, stories. My people are about stories. You are about stories. Everyone is. And I realized in that moment that I am doing it the way you want me to do it, that I'm telling my stories and sharing other stories, and that in this, that's how you're using me with your people. And I thank you for that. Who am I? I always say, who am I that you would use me in such a way? Father, I pray for everybody who messaged me, emailed me this week, in need of prayer, people who are struggling. You know what their concerns are. And I just thank you for coming alongside us and answering prayers in the way that you do. Father, also I want to thank you for everybody who donates financially to the show. It just takes the burden of a cost that's pretty significant for us every month. It takes some of that burden off of us, um, and I just appreciate that provision. I would do it either way, but I appreciate that you're trying to balance that out for us so that it's not all on our shoulders. And I thank you for every person who donates, no matter what the size of the donation, because we know that you are the one who brings the multiplication on those sorts of things. Um, and we thank you for that multiplication. Father, most of all, we thank you for your son, Jesus. And I just would encourage anybody who does not believe in Jesus or has not felt the love of Jesus to enter into a relationship and accept Jesus as what he was sent for, as the person to usher us onto heaven. And we just thank you so much that he sacrificed so greatly to create that way for us. And Father, if anyone is here today, I just pray that they would pray with me. Father, we just thank you so much for your son, Jesus. We thank you for sending him. We thank you for his path in life and that he was willing to go to the cross for us. And we accept that gift of salvation as we sit here together. And we thank you for sending that gift of salvation that we could be in heaven together with you, and that is your will for us because you love us that much, that we are sons and daughters, brothers and sisters of the Christ. We thank you for being a living God who offers us this beautiful gift. And it's a gift. Whether we take it or not is up to us. And today we accept that gift, Father. We thank you so much for anybody here who's just kind of lost their way. Father, we pray that you would help pull them back to you and that their hearts would be soft and be receptive to that pulling. And they would come back to you because your yoke is easy. Your love is great and you want to be in personal relationship with us. You want to be a friend. And what other God wants to be a friend? You are that God. And we thank you for being that God. We pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, guys, I love you whole big bunches. I hope you heard that. My chair had turned me away from the mic. I will see you on Friday. Again, love you whole big bunches. Nurse Penny out.